In the misty hollows of Appalachia, veteran Michael Carter digs at the soaked earth behind his $5 farm. What he uncovers is not an ordinary relic, but the roof of a long-forgotten car, its rust bleeding. Through the soil beside him, his loyal German shepherd. Rex growls low, a sound that seems to vibrate from the bones of the mountain. With a final wrench of the shovel, the ground collapses, revealing the frame of a 1979 Mustang entombed for decades. And as Michael leans closer, the stale breath of the past rises to meet him, not with silence, but with the promise of a secret that was never meant to be unearthed. The rain had ceased only hours earlier, leaving the Appalachian ridges wrapped in a cool mist that clung stubbornly to the trees and fields like a second skin. Michael Carter stood at the porch of his newly acquired farm, boots sinking slightly into the soft planks that had long ago surrendered their varnish to decades of neglect. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, the lines etched into his weathered face suggesting both endurance and silent suffering. His hair, cropped short out of habit rather than style, was dark with faint silver threads along the temples, the inevitable testimony of years of service and stress. A faint beard shadowed his jawline, not carefully maintained, but not entirely unkempt either, just enough to remind anyone who looked that Michael was a man who had long ago traded vanity for survival. His gray-blue eyes carried an intensity that was difficult to ignore, sharp as a hunter's gaze, yet heavy with shadows that refused to lift, remnants of deserts and battlefields half a world away. He had bought the land for $5, 5 paper bills passed across the county clerk's desk during a perfunctory auction. The explanation had been simple enough. No heirs, taxes unpaid, an old structure falling apart, and a plot whispered about in town as cursed. In Harmony Hollow, the small community nestled among the ridges, locals rarely spoke of the property directly, but Michael had caught fragments at the diner. Bad luck, strange noises, folks don't last a season there. For him, none of that mattered. To a man whose inner battles never ceased, whispers of superstition were meaningless compared to the promise of silence, space, and a chance to rebuild a life in his own terms. At his side stood Rex, the German shepherd who had followed him through the last leg of his military career and into this uncertain civilian existence. Rex was 9 years old, a large dog with a sable and gray coat that shimmered under the weak sun, his ears always pricked, and amber eyes fixed with soldierly discipline. His muzzle was flecked with white now, a sign of age, but his body remained powerful and lean, every muscle conditioned by years of training and countless patrols. To Michael, Rex was more than a companion. He was the last tether to a life of structure, loyalty, and trust in a world that had otherwise unraveled. The dog was watchful yet calm, affectionate only when the moment demanded, his loyalty so absolute it sometimes made Michael uneasy, as though Rex understood things no words could contain. Michael surveyed the property again. The farmhouse squatted on the slope like an exhausted sentinel, its roof patched with mismatched shingles, one shutter hanging by a single rusted hinge. The barn leaned at an angle, its doors swollen by moisture and warped by years of storms. Grass and weeds had claimed most of the yard, rising high enough to conceal stones and forgotten tools. Yet there was a kind of rugged beauty here. The surrounding hills rose like dark green waves, their crests cloaked in fog. The air smelled of pine, wet soil, and the faint mineral tang that drifted from old coal seams long since abandoned. For Michael, it was not simply land. It was the possibility of anchoring himself after years of drifting. Since his discharge, he had lived out of motels, temporary rentals, and the backs of vehicles. The farm, however broken, was his. For $5 he had bought not just property, but a chance, perhaps the last, to create a home. The morning passed in silence, save for the distant call of crows. Michael unpacked what little he owned: a duffel bag of clothes, a toolbox battered from decades of use, a camping stove, and a folded cot he could set in the only room with intact floorboards. Rex circled the yard, nose down, tail swaying lightly, his gait purposeful but relaxed. Michael allowed himself a moment to breathe. Here, at least, no sergeant's voice barked orders, no mortars whistled unseen, no news anchor recited numbers of the dead. Here was only the sound of wind combing through the high grass. Yet silence in Appalachia could be deceptive. By late afternoon, the mist thickened again, and the sky darkened, though no new rain came. Michael, restless, picked up a shovel from the barn and began clearing debris from the backyard. He preferred the ache of physical labor to the gnawing restlessness of idle thought. Rex trailed him until suddenly the dog froze, muscles stiff, ears locked forward. He released a low growl, not hostile, but unmistakably alert. "What is it, boy?" Michael asked softly, instinctively lowering his voice, the soldier in him still reacting to signals from his partner. Rex stepped forward, paws sinking into a patch of earth near the back fence. The soil looked disturbed, darker than the surrounding ground, as though water had gathered and then fled. The dog sniffed, pawed once, then again with more urgency. Clumps of wet dirt flew aside. Michael crouched, his heart thudding, not from fear of what was there, but from the strange electricity that came with the dog's certainty. Rex never alerted without reason. Michael drove the shovel into the soft ground. The soil gave way too easily, almost inviting, as if something beneath had waited years to be uncovered. After only a few strikes, the metal edge of the shovel clanged against something harder. He scraped aside the dirt and blinked at the dull gleam revealed beneath. Rust, mottled and red-brown, spread across a curved surface. He knelt, brushing mud with his gloved hand. Paint emerged, a faded crimson. It was not a rock, nor farm equipment. It was metal shaped with intention. Rex barked once, sharp, then stood silent again, his amber eyes locked on the patch of earth as though he recognized the significance. Michael's breath slowed. He tapped the surface, hollow. He moved further, exposing more until a distinct contour appeared. A windshield frame. Michael staggered back onto his heels, staring. Buried in his backyard, under years of soil and silence, lay the unmistakable form of a car. Not just any car. The faint line of chrome trim, the contour of the hood, the suggestion of a fastback slope told him it was a Ford Mustang, late 70s model, perhaps 1979. He had seen them once, roaring along highways when he was still a boy, long before enlistment, before sand and smoke became his world. A chill coursed through him that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He had paid $5 for cursed land and silence. Instead, he had unearthed a machine entombed like a coffin, rust bleeding through its skin. His mind raced. Who would bury a car? Why here? Why on this land everyone avoided? He remembered the whispers in town, the quick way locals had turned their eyes elsewhere when the auctioneer announced the lot. It was not just superstition. It was knowledge. Rex pressed against his leg, silent but firm, a living anchor. Michael rested a hand on the dog's head, feeling the steady warmth, the heartbeat that had guided him through darker places. His own chest felt heavy. He wanted peace. He had sought only quiet. Instead, the farm had already whispered a secret, and he knew instinctively it would not stop here. Night crept over Appalachia, the last light fractured by clouds. Michael stood before the half-exposed car, shovel still in hand, dirt streaked across his arms and jeans. He stared at the crimson ruin beneath the soil and understood one thing with clarity. This $5 farm had cost him more than money. It had bought him into a story buried long before his arrival, a story that demanded to be unearthed. Michael Carter knelt in the mud, the fading light of Appalachia dimming fast, his calloused hands trembling against the wet curve of metal. The outline of the 1979 Mustang had emerged clearer with every stroke of his shovel, a relic both beautiful and sinister. Rex stood rigid, his body angled toward the half-exposed car, ears sharp, his amber eyes fixed on it as if he could hear a heartbeat where none existed. Michael's instincts told him this was no ordinary abandoned vehicle. Something about the air, heavy and metallic, carried the suffocating weight of a tomb. The rain had softened the ground enough that Michael could dig more quickly. By twilight, the driver's side window frame was exposed. The glass had long since cracked, fractures spreading across its surface like a spider's web. He braced the crowbar against the rim, his muscles straining as rust screamed in protest. The pane gave way with a shattering crunch, shards tumbling into the darkness inside. Rex barked once, startled by the sound, then pressed close to Michael's leg, a silent question written in his posture. "Are we sure we want to look?" Michael pulled a flashlight from his belt, clicked it on, and aimed the white beam into the car's interior. The first thing he saw made his breath catch. The driver's seat still held an occupant. The skeleton slumped forward, seatbelt stretched taut across the ribcage, the empty sockets of a skull tilted toward the steering wheel. Strands of matted hair clung stubbornly to the back of the skull, the last frail trace of life that had once colored this ghost. A blouse, rotted, faded to threads, still clung to the shoulders, its original color indiscernible. The beam lingered on the thin bones of the hands, one still curled near the gearshift, as if gripping it in a final moment of panic. Michael's chest tightened, not out of fear, but out of the overwhelming presence of tragedy. Whoever this had been, she had not died peacefully. Rex let out a low growl that vibrated against Michael's knee. His fur bristled along the spine, tail stiff. The dog wasn't afraid, but wary, the way he had once been in combat zones when the air smelled wrong, when danger lingered unseen. Michael placed a hand on Rex's back, steadying him, steadying himself. He aimed the light toward the passenger side. The seat was empty, though the fabric was shredded, mold blooming across the foam. The dashboard had collapsed inward slightly, and the glove box hung ajar. Michael set the crowbar aside, reached cautiously into the car, through the broken window, and pried the glove box open. Inside lay a tangle of papers, water-stained and fused together, and among them 2 items that seemed untouched by time. The first was a folded document sealed in a plastic sleeve, a registration slip bearing the name Diane Miller, dated 1988. The edges were smudged but legible. Michael whispered the name aloud, and for a moment the empty car seemed to answer with silence, thicker than before. The second was a watch, silver with a cracked face, its leather strap stiff and brittle. He turned it over and read the engraving, D.M. The initials cut into the back of the case gleamed faintly in the flashlight beam, the strokes sharp and deliberate. Michael's pulse thudded in his ears. The initials could match the name on the registration, but they could also mean something else, someone else. He slipped the watch into his pocket, a decision made more by instinct than reason. A soldier's gut rarely lied. Behind him, Rex shifted, his claws scraping lightly against stone. Michael followed the dog's gaze. The trees along the edge of the yard stood tall and black against the horizon, but there was no movement, no sound, but the occasional drip of water from their leaves. Yet Rex remained tense, his growl deepening. "Easy, boy," Michael whispered, though he felt it too, the uncanny sensation of being watched. The beam swept back inside the car. A purse lay collapsed on the passenger side floor. Michael reached again, pulling it out. The leather peeled at his touch, the strap tearing easily. Inside were the remnants of personal belongings, A comb with a few strands of brittle hair, lipstick melted into waxy residue, a packet of receipts from gas stations in neighboring counties. Each piece anchored Diane Miller in time, in life. She had been real. She had driven this car. She had likely sat in a diner not unlike the one Michael had passed through when he arrived in Harmony Hollow. And then, abruptly, her story had ended here, beneath this soil. Michael sat back on his heels, staring at the bones still strapped into the driver's seat. His mind churned. Why bury the car instead of abandoning it? Why go to the trouble of hiding it beneath earth and silence? Was it shame, fear, or an attempt to erase the woman entirely? He had learned long ago that violence often left its traces not just in wounds, but in choices. How a body was hidden, how silence was enforced. The last light of day drained from the sky, and Michael knew he could not stay out here much longer. He closed the glove box, though the rusted hinge protested. He tugged the tarp from his pack and draped it loosely over the exposed section of car. It would not conceal it perfectly, but enough to keep prying eyes from the road until he knew what to do. Rex nudged his arm, impatient, ready to return to the house. Michael rose, his knees stiff, his clothes damp with sweat and mud. He cast one last look at the skeletal driver. "I'll find out who did this," he murmured under his breath, not as a promise to the dead alone, but to himself. The watch in his pocket weighed heavy, as though it carried a history too dark for him to comprehend yet. Inside the farmhouse, he lit a lantern, the glow casting long shadows across the decaying walls. Rex circled once before lying down near the door, his eyes never fully closing. Michael sat at the rickety kitchen table, spreading out the registration slip and receipts he had salvaged. He read the name again, Diane Miller, and tried to imagine her. Was she young, middle-aged, married, lost, or running? Every person had a story, but here the story had been forcefully stopped. Michael's hand closed around the watch. The initials stared back at him like an accusation. He remembered the locals' silence at the auction, the way their conversations had folded inward at the mention of this property. They knew, or at least they suspected. Perhaps they had lived with the rumor so long it had become part of their silence, the kind of secret no one dared disturb. The lantern flickered as a draft slipped through a crack in the wall. Michael glanced toward the window. Beyond it, the night was absolute, the kind of darkness only found in mountains where towns were sparse. He forced himself to focus. Tomorrow he would need answers. For now he needed rest, though he doubted rest would come easily with the weight of bones just yards away beneath the soil. Rex shifted again, ears twitching, a low rumble forming in his chest. Michael rose, checked the door, ensured the lock still held. The old wood might not stop a determined intruder, but it gave him a thin thread of reassurance. He looked down at his companion. "We're not alone in this anymore, boy," he said. Rex thumped his tail once, but his eyes remained wary, ever watching the dark. The Mustang waited outside, half buried, a coffin of steel and silence. Inside it, a life had ended violently, and in his pocket a silver watch with DM engraved had reopened the door to a past the town of Harmony Hollow had chosen to forget. Michael knew with certainty he had unearthed more than a car. He had unearthed a secret, one that would not stay buried. Michael Carter sat at the kitchen table of the decaying farmhouse, lantern light trembling across the registration slip, the brittle receipts, and the silver watch that now rested heavy in his palm. His thumb brushed across the engraving DM again and again, as if the initials might rearrange themselves into something less sinister. He had learned to trust gut instinct during his years in uniform, and every instinct screamed that this object was not just a forgotten trinket. It was a clue, and perhaps a curse. Rex stirred by the door, his ears twitching at sounds Michael could not hear, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Michael's mind wrestled with hesitation. He had spent years trying to live without authorities, without bureaucracy, carving out peace in silence. But the bones outside, strapped eternally to the driver's seat of a buried Mustang, demanded more than his silence. Finally, with a sharp inhale, he picked up the old rotary phone mounted on the wall, its cord tangled, its surface yellowed by age. His voice was steady as he dialed. 911. The operator's voice came crisp and efficient, a young woman whose tone suggested experience in handling panicked locals. Michael introduced himself, his words brief. An old car, buried in his property, human remains inside. She asked questions, each one routine, but Michael could feel the invisible shift the moment he said skeletal remains. Her tone sharpened, her diction slowed. She promised deputies would be dispatched immediately and asked him to remain at the property until they arrived. Michael hung up, his hand lingering on the receiver. Rex growled softly, not at the phone, but at the night beyond the windows. Michael stroked his head, murmuring reassurance, though he felt none himself. He slipped the watch into his pocket, a secret he could not explain, but knew he must keep hidden. The night outside had grown cold when headlights finally cut through the trees, bouncing along the uneven road before swinging into the overgrown yard. The first vehicle was a Ford Crown Victoria, paint dulled by mountain weather, its red and blue bar flickering in muted pulses. A second followed, a county-issued SUV with mud caked along the tires. From the first car stepped Sheriff Tom Grady, a man in his late 50s. Broad in frame but softened at the edges, his once powerful build now weighed down by time and routine. His face bore the map of long years in service, deep creases around the eyes, heavy lines around the mouth, a bristly mustache more salt than pepper. He had thinning blonde hair combed carefully back, though the effort could not hide the recession of his hairline. His demeanor suggested someone accustomed to authority but not immune to fatigue. He carried himself with the wary patience of a man who had seen more than his share of tragedy but lacked the drive to dig deeper than necessary. Beside him walked Deputy Mark Hensley, mid-30s, lean, and angular. His dark brown hair was cut short, his jaw perpetually shadowed by stubble, as if he had given up on the idea of ever being clean-shaven. His brown eyes carried a sharpness, though his nervous movements betrayed someone still struggling with the weight of his badge. Hensley had grown up in these hills, son of a miner who had been crushed in a collapse when Mark was only 10. The trauma had given him both an instinct for caution and a simmering need to prove himself, traits that made him eager but sometimes reckless in pursuit of recognition. The SUV door opened next. Dr. Evelyn Price, the county medical examiner, stepped out. In her late 40s, she was tall and spare, her black hair tied into a severe bun, streaked with gray at the temples. Her face was pale, angular, and sharp-eyed behind rectangular glasses. She wore a heavy coat over practical slacks and boots, carrying herself with a mixture of detachment and precision. Years of studying corpses had dulled her outward reactions, but beneath her clinical tone lived a stern compassion for the forgotten dead. Grady approached, his flashlight cutting across the yard until it found the disturbed earth. "Mr. Carter." His voice was gravelly, half friendly, half weary. "That's right," Michael answered, standing straight, though every muscle wanted to fold into the shadows. Rex pressed against his leg, silent sentinel. "You said you found a car?" the sheriff asked. Michael led them to the edge of the yard where the Mustang still lay half buried, the tarp pulled back. The beam of their flashlight swept across the rusted frame, the shattered glass, and the ghastly silhouette in the driver's seat. Deputy Hensley let out a sharp breath, muttering something under his breath. Dr. Price crouched immediately, her gloved hand already reaching for her kit. Grady squatted down, his knees popping audibly. His face twisted into something unreadable, a mixture of recognition and dread quickly veiled by the mask of duty. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Looks like you were right to call." Dr. Price leaned into the car, her flashlight steady. Female, skeletal remains consistent with decades of decomposition. Clothing fragments intact, seatbelt still fastened. This isn't accidental abandonment. Her voice carried clinical certainty, no trace of drama. Deputy Hensley circled the perimeter, his beam darting into the woods. "Strange no one stumbled on this sooner," he said, though his tone was more accusation than wonder. Michael kept silent, though the words echoed his own thoughts. He watched Grady's eyes linger too long on the Mustang, as though memories stirred in him that he did not want others to see. The sheriff straightened, pulling a radio from his belt. "We'll need this scene secured. Mark, call it in. Get crime scene tape, floodlights, and a tow arranged for the morning." As orders were given, Michael stepped back, his hand brushing, the watch hidden in his pocket. He knew instinctively not to reveal it. The sheriff's reaction, subtle though it was, raised questions. Why had his eyes widened not with shock, but recognition? Why did his voice tremble, not with surprise, but with weariness, as if he had feared this discovery for years? Rex shifted beside him, sensing his unease. Dr. Price finally rose from the car, pulling off her gloves. She looked at Michael with professional courtesy. "You did the right thing, Mr. Carter. Too many of these mountains hold secrets that never see the light. At least this one will have a chance." Her words struck him deeper than she could know. He nodded, but inside unease grew. By midnight, the yard glowed with artificial light, yellow tape fluttering against the night breeze. Deputies arrived with equipment, their boots trampling the wet grass, their conversations hushed. Michael stood off to the side, Rex pressed against him, both outsiders in what had once been his yard. Sheriff Grady approached once more. His face, half lit by floodlight, looked older, heavier. "You'll need to come down to the station tomorrow," he said. "Just procedure. Nothing to worry about." His tone was friendly enough, but his eyes avoided Michael's. Michael nodded. "I'll be there." As the sheriff turned away, Michael's fingers closed around the watch in his pocket. The weight of it pressed like a secret too dangerous to reveal. He understood now why the farm had been sold so cheaply, why the townspeople had looked away. The mystery was not just buried in his backyard, it was buried in their silence, their fear, their refusal to confront the past. And now, because of $5 and a restless dog's instincts, Michael was tangled in it. The morning air in Appalachia carried a damp chill, a mist rolling off the mountains and sliding down into the hollows like a ghost reluctant to leave. Michael Carter felt the weight of sleeplessness behind his eyes as he sipped burnt coffee from a chipped enamel mug. Rex, the 8-year-old German shepherd with his thick sable and gray coat, stood at the edge of the porch, ears twitching and nose raised, scenting every change in the wind. Michael had trained him to be vigilant, but even without command, the dog was a sentinel, sensitive to undercurrents Michael could only sense in his gut. The memory of the sheriff's evasive gaze the night before gnawed at him. He needed answers, and the county library seemed the most likely place to find them. By noon, Michael was driving his dusty pickup down the winding road into the town of Claywood, a settlement small enough to fit into a single main street. The place looked like time had forgotten it, peeling paint on clapboard storefronts, a gas station with one ancient pump, and a diner with a sign whose neon buzzed faintly even in daylight. Rex sat in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the glass, eyes following everything. Michael parked in front of the Claywood County Library, a brick building no larger than a farmhouse, its windows narrow and clouded with dust. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old paper and lemon polish. Behind the front desk sat Sarah Whitmore, the librarian. She was in her early 50s, tall and lean, with auburn hair tied back in a loose bun streaked by silver. Her pale skin was dotted with freckles, her green eyes sharp but softened by a kind of maternal patience. A widow for nearly 15 years, she had chosen the quiet company of books over the noise of gossip, and it showed in the gentle but guarded way she greeted strangers. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice calm, but her eyes flicked over Michael with the swift assessment of someone used to measuring people by how they carried themselves. Michael explained that he was looking for local newspaper archives from the late 1980s. Sarah tilted her head, her fingers drumming lightly on the wooden counter. "That's a long way back. We keep microfilm in the back room." She rose, moving with the practiced grace of someone who had spent her life among quiet aisles, and led him to a small room where an old microfilm reader sat like a relic from another age. As she showed him how to load the reels, Michael noticed her glance at his hands, rough and scarred, then at his dog waiting patiently outside the glass door. Her eyes softened briefly, but when he mentioned the name Diane Miller, something in her posture stiffened. She avoided his gaze, muttering only, "You'll find what you need in those reels." Hours passed as Michael scrolled through grainy pages, his eyes adjusting to the flickering letters. Finally, he found it. "Local woman vanishes, Mustang missing," dated September 23rd, 1988. The article mentioned Diane Miller, 27 at the time, last seen driving through Claywood on her way to visit family. The report hinted at foul play, but no suspects were ever identified. The search, it said, had been called off after several weeks with no results. Diane's name disappeared from the papers after that. Michael leaned back, the faint hum of the reader buzzing in his ears. His instincts whispered that it had not been incompetence but suppression that buried this case. When he returned the reels, Sarah's smile was courteous, but her eyes betrayed unease. Leaving the library, Michael crossed the street to the Creekside Diner, a low-ceilinged room with red vinyl booths and a counter lined with stools. The place smelled of frying bacon and brewed coffee. Behind the counter worked Stanley Cooper, the owner, a burly man in his late 50s with thick forearms and a graying mustache. His apron was stained, and his blue eyes carried the wary sharpness of someone who had lived his entire life in this town, measuring outsiders carefully. Michael ordered coffee and pie, easing into conversation with a group of older men nearby. They wore overalls and spoke with the clipped accents of coal miners' sons. When Michael casually mentioned Diane Miller's name, the room fell into silence. Forks paused mid-air, and the men turned back to their plates without a word. Stan's expression hardened as he leaned closer. "Best not to stir up old ghosts," he said flatly, his voice edged with something close to warning. Michael finished his coffee in silence, the weight of their stares pressing against his back as he left. He felt Rex's reassuring presence as the dog brushed against his leg outside, but the chill that had entered his bones remained. The town wasn't just silent. It was protecting something. That night, after driving the lonely road back to his farmhouse, Michael felt exhaustion settle over him, but unease kept him restless. Rex refused to leave the porch, his body taut, ears pricked toward the tree line. Michael chalked it up to residual tension until he stepped into the yard and saw it. A hunting knife, its blade long and gleaming even in moonlight, stabbed upright into the wooden table on due outside his door. The handle was made of polished antler, and the force of the blow had split the wood fibers. Michael froze, every nerve alert. Rex growled low, the sound vibrating like distant thunder. The knife wasn't random. It was a message. Someone had walked across his land, close enough to his house, confident enough to leave a calling card. His jaw tightened as he pulled the blade free, studying it. It was custom forged, the kind favored by serious hunters, not something easily discarded. He whispered to Rex, "They're watching us, boy." The dog pressed closer, his amber eyes fixed on the darkness. Michael felt the soldier in him stir again, the old instincts of survival and counter-strategy flooding back. The cheap price of the farm now made sense. He wasn't living in forgotten land. He was standing on buried secrets, and someone intended to keep them buried. The farmhouse was wrapped in silence, save for the occasional creak of its old wooden beams. Michael Carter sat at the kitchen table under the weak glow of a single lamp, the hunting knife left on the porch now lying beside him. Its blade caught the light in a cold gleam, a reminder that he was being watched. Rex lay on the floor with his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, amber and alert, following every subtle shift in Michael's posture. The veteran felt the storm gathering around him. He had been in ambushes before. Different terrain, different enemies, but the rhythm was the same, something hidden, waiting to strike. Restless, Michael returned to the rusted Mustang at the back of his property. The car was silent now, stripped of its gruesome presence by the removal of the remains, but it still radiated the heavy air of secrets buried too long. He had avoided opening the trunk, reluctant to disturb whatever it might hold. But after the warning knife, hesitation was a luxury. With a crowbar gripped tight in his scarred hands, he forced the latch until it broke with a rusty shriek. The trunk lid lifted to reveal dust, mildew, and forgotten objects. Among broken cassette cases, old clothing fragments, and decayed paper, his hand closed on something intact, a black cassette tape, its label smudged beige but still legible with a single word, Diane. He brought it inside, his chest tightening with unease. The farmhouse still had an old tape player, relic of a past owner, that sat on a shelf under a stack of newspapers. He slid the cassette in and pressed play. At first there was only static, the hiss of tape worn with decades. Then a woman's voice broke through, faint but urgent. It was young, trembling, and filled with fear. "If anyone finds this, my name is Diane Miller." Michael froze. The voice carried desperation, every word clip-bait as though she knew time was running out. "I don't trust the police here. Deputy Murphy is not who he says he is. He's been following me, asking questions that don't make sense. If something happens, if I disappear, look at him. Remember his name, Daniel Murphy." The tape clicked into silence, then word again, but no further words came. Michael sat in stunned quiet, his fists clenched. The initials on the silver watch, DM, took on an entirely new weight. It wasn't Diane's memento. It might belong to Murphy himself. He thought of Sheriff Tom Grady's uneasy expression, the town's silence, the knife stabbed into his porch. It was a chain, and every link pointed toward Daniel Murphy. Michael exhaled slowly, reaching for his phone. He scrolled through the contacts until he found the one man he trusted beyond question. Special Agent Mark Jensen, FBI. Mark was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and cropped dark hair, streaked faintly with gray. His face bore a faint scar across the cheekbone, a reminder of the ambush in Kandahar, where Michael had saved his life. Unlike many agents, Mark had the posture of a soldier, rigid, precise, always alert. He carried himself with the cool authority of a man who had seen the worst and chose to keep moving forward. His voice, when he answered the phone, was steady and low. "Carter," Mark said, using his last name the way soldiers do. "Been a while." Michael explained in clipped, careful words what he had uncovered: the buried Mustang, the remains, the watch, the silence of Claywood, and now the cassette. He could almost hear Mark leaning forward through the line. "You're saying Diane Miller left a recording naming Daniel Murphy?" Mark's voice was calm, but beneath it was a sharp edge of interest. Yes, Michael said. And Murphy was the deputy assigned to the case. Retired early, then turned up with money. A company in West Virginia, construction, development, built himself a fortune out of nowhere. There was a pause, then Mark asked, "Do you still have the watch?" Michael hesitated. "Yes, it's here." "Good," Mark replied. "Photograph everything, tape, watch, registration. Send them through the encrypted channel I gave you back in Colorado. Don't use email, don't use texts. If Murphy's tied into local law enforcement, you can't trust the sheriff. This smells like a buried case." Michael grabbed his camera and took detailed photos: the scratched watch face, the engraving, the cassette tape, the registration slip. He uploaded them through the secure app, watching the files blink into transmission. Rex stirred at the window, his ears rising. Michael followed his gaze but saw only the shadows of trees swaying in the night. Still, the unease returned, sharp as a knife blade. Mark's voice came again, firm. "I'll dig on Murphy from my end. You need to keep your head down. If he's behind this, he'll know you've found more than you should. You're not just a landowner anymore, Carter. You're a target." Michael's jaw tightened, memories of past battlefields threading into the present. "I've been a target before," he said quietly. After ending the call, Michael leaned against the table, staring at the knife that still lay there. He wasn't just unraveling an old disappearance. He was walking into the heart of a conspiracy that had stretched decades, built on silence and fear. Rex came to his side, pressing his head against Michael's thigh. The dog's warmth was grounding, pulling him back from the edge of paranoia. Michael scratched behind his ears, whispering, "We're not done, boy. Not even close." As the night deepened, Michael understood one thing with clarity. Diane Miller's voice hadn't just whispered from the cassette. It had called him into battle again. The Appalachian woods were alive with sounds of their own: an owl hooting from a blackened pine, the rustle of unseen animals moving through underbrush, the distant creak of trees swaying in the night wind. Michael Carter crouched beside the flickering lantern on his table, the cassette tape still sitting there like a relic of accusation. He knew Daniel Murphy would not let this lie. The whisper of Diane Miller's voice on tape was too dangerous. Whoever had left the hunting knife was not bluffing. They knew exactly where he lived. Michael opened his battered laptop, its edges scuffed from years of travel. Using a secure proxy connection Mark Jensen had taught him years ago, he uploaded the photographs of the watch and cassette tape to a local news blog called the Appalachian Exposé. The site was run by Clara Hayes, a journalist in her late 30s who had made enemies in more than one county for digging into corruption and publishing stories the big papers ignored. Clara was short, with a compact frame, sharp brown eyes set under arched brows, and a wild mane of curly black hair she often pinned messily on top of her head. Her olive-toned skin was weathered from years of chasing stories in sun and rain, and her personality was as relentless as her pen. She had grown up in Claywood, but left after her father, a miner, was killed in an accident she always suspected was caused by negligence and cover-ups. Ever since, she had made it her mission to hunt down hidden truths, no matter how ugly. Michael drafted the message simply: "Not all secrets stay buried. Ask Daniel Murphy what he left behind in 1988. He attached the photograph of the silver watch engraved DM and hit send. As the file disappeared into the ether, Rex stirred suddenly, his ears standing tall, a low growl vibrating from his chest. Michael killed the lantern and stepped silently onto the porch. The night smelled faintly of oil and rubber. He crouched low, his gray eyes narrowing as his gaze swept the dirt path leading to his farmhouse. In the soft earth near the edge of the clearing, fresh tire tracks cut deep grooves. They were wide, heavy SUV tracks. His chest tightened. Someone had driven close, surveying, and left. He stroked Rex's head. "Good boy. We're not waiting for them to come back unprepared." The soldier in Michael resurfaced with sharp precision. He dismantled his visible camp. The canvas tent was folded away, the fire pit scattered and covered with earth. He relocated his supplies to a camouflaged lean-to hidden behind thick pines, its frame low and difficult to spot without stepping directly onto it. He moved his truck behind a rock outcrop, brushing branches against its tires to obscure the tracks. Then came the traps. From his backpack he retrieved a spool of fishing line, tying it across narrow approaches to the clearing at ankle height. At each line he fastened tin cans filled with pebbles, crude but effective alarms. He placed broken glass shards under leaves near the main trail so any intruder would betray themselves with crunching steps. Rex padded silently alongside him, watching every motion, as though recognizing this ritual from their days in hostile terrain. By dawn, the camp had transformed. What once looked like a peaceful veterans' retreat now resembled a forward operating base. Michael climbed a rocky ledge overlooking the ravine where the Mustang lay buried, its rusted roof barely visible through scattered brush. From here he had a commanding view of the logging track and the open hollow. He scanned the horizon, thoughts circling back to Murphy. How many men would he bring? How desperate was he to retrieve what was buried with Diane Miller? Whew! Michael's jaw clenched. He had no doubt they would return. The knife on the porch, the tire tracks, this was a prelude, a test of his reaction. By mid-morning he heard the crunch of gravel. A lone vehicle approached, not an SUV this time, but an old Jeep. Rex tensed, but Michael motioned him down. Through binoculars he saw Clara Hayes step out, her notepad sticking out of a worn leather satchel. She wore a denim jacket, jeans, and hiking boots scuffed from years of use. She glanced around nervously before moving toward the farmhouse. Michael descended quickly from his vantage point, intercepting her on the trail. Rex emerged from the trees first, his growl making her freeze. Clara raised both hands. "I'm not your enemy. I got your message. You sent me proof about Murphy." Her voice was confident, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. She knew what it meant to tread on dangerous ground. Michael studied her before nodding. "You came fast." "I know how this county works," Clara replied. "You dig too deep, they make you disappear. I've written about Murphy before. Construction contracts, land deals that didn't make sense. He's untouchable here. But if Diane Miller named him before she died, that's a headline that could blow this wide open." Michael gestured toward the woods. "Then you also know showing up here makes you a target." Clara smiled grimly. "I've been a target since I printed my first story." Michael respected her grit, but remained cautious. He showed her the cassette, playing Diane's voice. Clara's sharp eyes widened, and she whispered, "This could ruin him." She scribbled notes rapidly, her fingers smudged with ink. Before they could continue, Rex growled again, this time low and urgent. Michael grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward cover behind the ledge. Moments later, the faint rumble of engines echoed through the valley. 2 black SUVs crawled along the logging track, dust plumes curling behind them. Clara's face paled. "They're here for you." Michael steadied his rifle, eyes hard. "No, they're here for the truth." From his position above the ravine, he watched as the SUVs slowed, their tinted windows reflecting the sun. He could make out the silhouettes of men inside. He counted at least 4. The vehicles paused at the edge of the clearing, engines idling like beasts waiting to pounce. Michael whispered to Rex, "Stay close." To Clara, he said, "This is where the fight begins." As the first SUV door opened and a tall figure stepped out, Michael's mind sharpened. The traps were set, the battlefield chosen. For the first time in decades, he wasn't running from war. He was calling it. The moon was high over Appalachia, silver light slipping through branches, glinting off the dew that clung to the pine needles. Michael Carter crouched low on the rocky ledge above the ravine, rifle steady, breath even, eyes sharp. Beside him, Rex stood poised, his coat bristling, ears pinned forward in absolute focus. Clara Hayes crouched nearby, her notebook forgotten in her satchel, the weight of reality replacing her usual reporter's resolve. Her brown eyes flicked nervously between Michael and the clearing below. They all knew something was about to happen. The first SUV rolled into the hollow just past midnight, its black paint gleaming like oil under the moonlight. The second followed close behind, engines growling low, lights cut to avoid notice. The doors opened, and men stepped out, 3 in total, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark tactical jackets. They carried rifles and moved with the quiet, disciplined steps of men who knew violence intimately. And then he emerged, Daniel Murphy. Murphy was in his mid-60s now, but age had not softened him. He was tall, nearly 6'2", still broad across the chest, with a presence that demanded attention. His once dark hair had gone to silver, cropped neatly, and his face bore the heavy lines of both time and ambition. His gray eyes were cold, assessing, the kind of eyes that had looked at people not as lives, but as obstacles. His jaw was square, clean-shaven, though the skin sagged slightly around the neck, betraying his years. His hands, though, were steady, one resting inside his coat, where Michael had no doubt a pistol was concealed. Murphy had the air of a man who had spent decades convincing others of his authority, a man who had built his fortune not only on lies, but on the bodies of those who had tried to resist him. Murphy surveyed the clearing, his eyes falling on the faint outline of the Mustang still half buried in the ravine. His lips twisted into something between a sneer and a grimace. "After all these years," he muttered, his voice carrying a gravely authority, "this cursed car still surfaces." Michael shifted his weight, ready. When one of the gunmen drew closer to the ravine, Rex leapt from the shadows like a streak of gray lightning. The German shepherd's powerful jaws clamped down on the man's wrist, forcing the rifle to fall. The man cried out in pain, crumpling to his knees as Rex growled, teeth unrelenting. The sudden chaos shattered the still night. Michael rose from the ledge and stepped into the open, rifle aimed, his voice hard as steel. "That's enough, Murphy." The other gunmen swung their weapons toward him, but Murphy raised a hand, steady and commanding. "Hold." He studied Michael with a faint smile. "The soldier, the outsider. I should have known you'd be trouble." Michael held up the silver watch, moonlight catching on the engraved initials. "This was yours. You dropped it the night Diane Miller vanished." Murphy's face twitched, a crack in his carefully constructed mask. Clara, hidden behind a boulder, whispered into her recorder, her pen moving furiously across paper. Michael's voice cut the air again, louder this time. "And I have her voice. The cassette. She named you, Murphy. She knew you were hunting her." Murphy's composure broke. His face twisted, his teeth bared in sudden rage. That cassette should never have existed. That watch should have stayed buried with her. His words echoed off the trees, a raw confession torn from him by anger and fear. The moment the admission left his lips, headlights cut through the night from the ridge above. Red and blue strobes followed, washing the ravine in flashing color. The thunder of boots striking dirt filled the clearing as FBI tactical teams poured in, rifles raised, voices booming commands. Murphy's men turned to fight, but they were outmatched. Within moments, one was pinned face down in the dirt, another shoved against the SUV, handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. Rex released his captive only when Michael gave the command, stepping back with a low growl, eyes still fixed on the man who had nearly raised his weapon again. Murphy, pale now, reached for the pistol hidden in his coat, but Michael was faster. With practiced precision, he kicked the weapon from Murphy's grip and drove him to the ground. The old man struggled, his face contorted with desperation, but the years had slowed him. 2 FBI agents rushed in, securing his arms, locking the cuffs tight. One of the agents, a tall man with cropped blond hair and a firm jaw, approached Michael. His vest bore the name Agent Collins, and his demeanor radiated calm control. "Carter, you did good. Jensen's intel checked out." He cast a glance at Murphy, then at the Mustang. "This is going to blow open 30 years of silence." Clara stepped forward, trembling but resolute, her pen poised. "And the world will finally hear Diane's story." As dawn broke over the Appalachians, the Mustang was winched out of the earth. Forensic teams surrounded it, cataloging every bone, every scrap of evidence. Michael stood aside, one hand resting on Rex's broad shoulders. The German shepherd pressed close, amber eyes soft now, as though sensing the storm was passing. Michael looked at the scene, the flashing lights, the handcuffed Murphy being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle, Clara scribbling notes as though her life depended on it, the agents securing the clearing, and he felt something shift inside him. This land, this $5 farm, had been sold cheap because it carried the weight of silence and blood. But now, with the truth unburied, it was no longer cursed. It was redeemed. He knelt beside Rex, pulling the dog close, his voice thick with quiet emotion. "We did it, boy. We brought her peace." Rex licked his face, tail thumping once against the ground. As the sun spilled over the ridges, warming the dew-soaked grass, Michael allowed himself to breathe fully for the first time in years. Justice had been served. The ghosts that haunted this land had been named. And at last the farm he bought for nearly nothing had given him and Diane Miller something priceless: truth. In the stillness of that Appalachian dawn, as the truth rose from the shadows, one could almost feel the touch of something greater, sayer, like the gentle hand of God guiding justice back to where it belonged. What was once buried in darkness was brought into light, reminding us that no lie lasts forever, and no soul is forgotten in His eyes. Just as Michael and Rex found courage to uncover Diane's story, so too in our daily lives we are called to seek truth, protect the innocent, and hold on to faith when the road feels heavy. Perhaps this tale is not only about an old farm and a hidden car, but about the quiet miracles that happen when people refuse to surrender to fear. And maybe, just maybe, it is a reminder that the Lord still works through the ordinary, the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a weary veteran, the persistence of those who seek justice. May God bless you and keep you in your own struggles, lighting the path when you walk through shadows. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with someone you love. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next journey of faith, hope, and courage. May the Lord's grace be with each of you who watch and listen, today and always.